What would you do if your night shift had one rule? Never open the door, no matter what's outside. Easy, right? Until you realize it's not what's outside you should worry about, it's what's already inside. The finale of the Blue Saga is finally here. Enjoy. Alright, this is Blue. I'm back and making another thread to kick off my stories about my life, so you can experience secondhand fear and laugh at my pathetic survival attempts. It'll be fun. So the last story actually brought back some bad memories. It wasn't that important and I never saw an animal again, so I'm gonna just move on to when I was 18. The small tidbits between me being 15 and 18 aren't much, just more ghostly and a couple of spots of other Australian cryptid that weren't as full on as they were once I turned 18. But if I'm writing about one, I'll mention in brackets or some if I've seen it before and give some basic details. Basically, I'm skipping that chapter of my life because when I was 17, I got meningitis and had to be hospitalized. Hallucinations, needle in the spine and all that. It was a whole pile of suck. A couple of months after that awful experience, I was contacted by Social Security and the police because my dad's body was found in a car that had crashed into a tree. He had been drinking and something happened on a road. I don't know. Combining that with the spooky and my bad home life, I ended up having a sort of mental breakdown my last year of high school, and I had to drop out because I couldn't handle life and stuff. I ended up moving in with Vav for the long haul because my mother and I had this massive fight, and she didn't want to ever see my face again. I got out of my funk just after my 18th birthday, and also my second job. First job was retail at a corner store. I worked at a privately owned service station, gas station for you Americans. So there was no Shell, Caltex, Star Mart, Woolworths, putting this brand all over. It was located a bit out of town on the highway, and it wasn't in great shape. There was a leak in one of the fridges that spread water over the linoleum constantly, so we had to run a towel over that section every couple of hours. I got to and from work in this lemon that Vav let me use because she had her truck. It was pretty rusty and sometimes the brakes stuck, but at that point I really didn't give a Anyway, about the shop, it was pretty small. We had only 3 pumps, 2 unleaded, 1 diesel. There was this big freezer about the length of a car outside that had a door on it for ice. Anyway, this ice box would clank up every couple of hours, quite loudly if you were working night shift. But I was pretty used to it. We had a staff toilet and shower in the back, a public toilet outside that required a key, and a couple of cameras that watched the door, the till, and the pumps. This place was decked out with only the most basic of because it was privately owned and away from everything else. Our boss, this guy named Matt, was actually pretty good. He always made sure that 2 people worked night shift, because people are less likely to rob/murder you if you have more than 1 person in the shop at one time. He also let us watch TV shows, bring in our own movies to watch behind the till on this small ass TV that was on the counter. I worked with 2 people, usually on night shift. This Aboriginal woman in her late 20s named Amy, and this other guy named Rooster, who looked like he fell out of a bad place in Europe or some. Amy was tall and skinny and had ever-frowning brown eyes that could barely be bothered to look up from the magazine she poured through. She used to paint her nails in the store weird colours, and I'd let her do mine if she was in a social mood. We fell into that awkward, not quite friends, but a little more than co-workers after I caught her smoking inside and told her she was an idiot. We were at a petrol station, for sake. Rooster was different. He had this stack of Ren and Stimpy VHSs he'd watch every time he came in, or else The Simpsons. He used to be the one to use a hammer to make the warped ground near the fridge leak go flat again, and also found it hilarious to play the Who Is That game with me. You see, when you work night shift at a petrol station, where there is no night counter, it means if people want fuel, or snacks, or what the ever, you have to hit the button that opens the automatic door, because after 10 PM, We turn off the auto and open it manually. Now the camera facing the door lets us get okay look at people, because sometimes you aren't there watching and you miss them step out of the darkness, or their cars, into the exterior lights. So there's this unspoken rule at Australian gas stations after about 11 PM, where if you are approaching one that has a night counter and you aren't a insane person, you hold out your hands either side of you, just off your body. This way we can see that you don't currently have a weapon on you, and really ups your chance of opening the door. You see, we're trapped inside this box until daylight, and if you look dodgy as we don't open the door. It's the number one rule of being a petrol station clerk, working night shift. You don't leave for anything. So if someone is being actively stabbed outside, you call the police. You do not open the door and you do not leave the store. After you call the police, you call your boss. It's just the way it works. When people show their hands, we decide if they look like they're going to try and steal or murder us. Then I hit the switch that opens the door, then it shuts and locks behind them. So while this person putters around all 5 aisles of snacks and other we watch them and try to figure out their story, because night shift is boring. That's the whole point of the Who Is That game. And it becomes pretty weird because of repeat customers. Every night shift petrol station clerk has a story about at least one repeat customer. For instance, we had one guy come in every Tuesday and Friday between the hours of 11 PM and 1 AM, and he would buy 8 bags of ice, a 4-pack of mini cable ties, and a large iced coffee. Every time, no changes. Each bag of ice is about the size of a 3 or 4-year-old and weighs 5 kilos. That is what makes the Who Is That game so much fun, because you have no clue what these people are doing. Now at this petrol station we had what I thought was a poltergeist or something. Rooster named it Marvin after Hitchhiker's Guide, because he seemed to be just the strawberriest son of a bitch. Now at first I didn't know the place had Marvin, but I found out about him on my first night shift. Now it's normal for to fall off shelves in the shop, and it's normal for the outside lights to flicker sometimes. We even had this industrial bug zapper outside that hummed lowly, and then crackled as it killed mosquitoes and moths. Anyway, my first night working there, somewhere after 2 AM, Rooster's episode of Ren and Stimpy was cut short. The TV turned off. I turned around from cleaning the window and Rooster was just sighing and shaking his head. He pulled out this cassette radio that was under the counter and he was bitching under his breath. "Come here, I'll show you how to deal with Marvin." "Who the f*** is Marvin?" The icebox outside clunked and I watched a packet of chips fall off a shelf. "Marvin is a don't worry about it. But you'll need to know how to do this so when you work with Amy you can. She will leave the store before she helps out with him." At this point I was getting pretty because, you know, I don't do ghosts. "What the There's a ghost in here?" "Nah, you'll never actually see Marvin. He just does Rooster explained that at some point or another during the night, Marvin turns off the TV and starts fussing about, knocking off the shelves and tripping you over, exploding bottles of Coke and walking around the store. It gets progressively worse the longer you ignore him. I sort of believe, but wait with Rooster, when we hear footsteps on the aisle, we keep the toiletries. Then several tissue boxes fell off the top shelf like something hit them on their way past. The way to stop Marvin is simple. The radio cassette player has a bootleg cassette already sitting inside it. Matt tried to get rid of it once and brought it back the next day, and Amy won't touch it. But Marvin loves Diana Ross and the Supremes, so you bring it out whenever Marvin decides to act out and play his tape. "Someday We'll Be Together" seems to be his favourite song. We've experimented with Marvin a lot since then. If you play the tape earlier in the night, he turns it off. He only wants to listen to it when he's ready. If you ignore him for more than an hour, the power trips out for a couple of seconds. If you fast forward through the song, the leak gets worse and you have to start again. I now play the song in my car a lot. So Marvin is okay, I guess. I think he's lonely or sad, but I was never able to do anything about it. I mean, we don't even know his real name, or if it's even a guy. I know it wasn't really a scary story, and in fact it makes me a little sad to share it, because playing the song every night stroke morning and trying not to think about why Marvin makes us play it for him is pretty upsetting. I just wanted to give you guys an idea of what working here was like. I worked both night shift and day shift, depending on the roster that changed over. But normally, I'd 2 weeks night shift and 2 weeks day shift. If you have any questions about Marvin, feel free to ask away. I don't know that much, but I'll answer what I can. Blue continues. One day I was working the day shift with Amy. It was almost too hot to move, and the air conditioning in the shop was busted. We had like 3 fans set up and on, but all you could smell was petrol and rotten mangoes, as somebody had spilled a bunch down the highway. The temperature was approaching 43 degrees Celsius, nearly 110 Fahrenheit. So these fans were doing all. I could pretty much slick my hair back with my sweat. The fans were doing nothing but push the heavy stank petrol mango decay air around. The Northern Territory is so awful. Amy looked like that day. I can remember clearly. She'd thrown her hair back in a ponytail, and there were weird strands sticking out. She looked like she hadn't slept in a good long time, and big sweat patches were on her back and underarms. We had to wear those god-awful white polos to work with name badges, and I knew if Amy looked like then I, with my red hair and fair complexion, was a hotter mess than Courtney Love. At around midday, I was mopping up the fridge puddle, trying not to gag at the weird ozone and rot smell you get when stuff melts in fridges and freezers. Amy was prowling behind the till back and forth like a trapped feral cat. "You're gonna wade through the flooring," I said as a joke, and Amy just bared her teeth at me. "You gonna tell me what to do, white fella?" she asked and narrowed her eyes at me. Great, we've devolved into her calling me white fella again. "My name is Blue," I said. Amy scoffed and continued pacing a hole in the floor. "That ain't your name. You and the bush hag you live with use fake names because the bad spirits took your old ones." I put the mop back in the bucket and wiped my face on the inside of my polo. "What? You live with the bush hag, eh?" "I live with my Aunt Vav, yes." Amy let out a peal of ugly laughter and produced a cigarette. "Vicious Vav, my uncle calls her. He and my cousin reckon she eats the goodness out of people. That's why she's stuck on her bloodland." And that was great, because of course this gossip would catch up to me. "He calls her Vicious Vav?" Amy nodded. "Vicious Vav. They say at night she turns into a parenti and attacks people, so she can be a person during the day." "Amy, that doesn't make any sense. Parenti are reptiles. They're cold-blooded. They need the sun to be active. I know my about lizards and snakes here, and listening to Vav tell me Dreamtime stories meant I wasn't about to believe the spewing from this 3rd-generation scum." She pounded at that. For those of you who don't know, if you see a wild parenti, it's probably as terrifying as seeing a crocodile, if not more so. They are the biggest monitor lizards Australia gets, and generally are about 2 meters long, either side of 6 foot. They can also stand up on their hind legs, so can be as tall, if not taller, than a man. Also, as we are closer to Catherine and not Alice Springs, it seems unlikely that we would see any parenti at this point. Basically, Amy is a dumb. Now I have about 1.5 feet of height on Amy, and easily 10 kilos. I was made for picking up and putting it down. So if we ever came to blows, I think physically I could do more damage. However, there's something about living in these parts that teaches you not to be prey. Something that makes weakness a shameful thing. After all, strength means little against somebody who will do absolutely anything to win. Another thing about the Aboriginals around here is they will not fight alone. It's annoying, and I've never had to deal with it. It's probably the best part of being Vicious Vav's nephew. I ended up making her put out the cigarette again. Tension between Amy and I was high for the rest of the day. I got it. She was terrified of me. Terrified I was going to hurt her somehow. But I needed this job. And I needed to know who the her uncle was. And why he was spreading. So we just carried on tentatively polite to each other. Not being overly friendly. At about 4 p.m, this woman pulled up in a white station wagon. She fueled her car, and I had seen her in before. Her name was Deb, I was pretty sure, and she was missing her left foot. She had a metal prosthetic we could see that day because she was wearing shorts. Her sneakers squeaked on the linoleum where the water was still drying, and I tried to break the ice between Amy and I and asked how she thought Deb lost her leg. Started up a game of who is that? Amy stared at Deb for a moment before she said, "It didn't want her to run." Okay, I thought, never play with Amy again. Deb was a mousy little lady who had surprisingly strong looking biceps and a slight burn across her nose and cheeks. She paid with rumble cash and had a blank smile on her face the whole time. "Does she ever say anything when she comes in?" I asked. Amy shook her head and popped some of the gum she started chewing instead of smoking at work. I got home about 7. Bob was already there making mac and cheese on the stove. I told her about Amy and asked what the she meant. Bob dumped the mac and cheese right in the sink. "You want to do this right now?" she asked, raising her brow. I looked at the food that still had a chance of being salvageable. "No, Vav, it can wait." But she ignored me and went into her bedroom. When she came back out, she had a whole bunch of papers shoved in between 2 pieces of wood, tied with a string. "Here," she said, and sat across from me, lighting up a cigarette. There were illustrations of men and women, black and pink, young and old, some children, staked to the ground, long pegs of wood through their torsos, hips, shoulders, palms, ankles, pinning them to the ground like butterflies on boards. A couple of the images seemed to be instructional, how to pin someone down without them bleeding out right away. I flicked through a couple more. In one of them, staked man was on fire. There were more. Corpses being left in some caves. The carrion being eaten by birds and lizards. There were a couple of people firing arrows into other people made to stand. Chains around their necks attached to nearby trees, so they couldn't run. "What the is this?" I asked. "Did this really happen?" I looked up and Vab was staring at the images, but there was no disgust at them, like I felt. Not even any curiosity. She had this look of resignation. That's what we did. Vav went through each document, carefully outlining what was happening. She told me that ever since our family had come to Australia, we had been doing things like this, up until her grandparents and their siblings. They had been the last. She said that we sacrificed, murdered, tortured people, that our land used to be much bigger, but she'd been selling off portions when she could, that the way we claimed it was wrong. She said that we were scientists, pioneers in our field. Aboriginal law dictates that a person can be transformed over time when exposed to the right things. She said that we were trying to recreate the things from the stories. However, we weren't doing that. We were just feeding what was already there, helping them breed. She told me that the reason we all use nicknames is because our real names are family legacy, and nobody around here wants to associate with someone with that legacy. And then she told me I would never be able to escape it. We made friends, many friends, friends that made everything go away. However, we had to go away as well. Then, we used up all our favors, and we were forced into exile. Vav tapped one of the only photographs in there. It was her as a child, smiling as she hugged a dog. But in order to fix this, we have to go back in. She placed one of the first images, the man on fire, in my hands. "This is why I need you. We have to work together." Now, I may be pretty stupid sometimes, but I am not an idiot. So of course, I ran. I made it halfway out of the house when Vav tackled me. "You idiot," she hissed. "You stupid idiot. I'm not going to kill you, Blue. Sake. I'm not helping you kill anyone else either. For sake, will you please calm down? That's not what we're going to do." I stopped struggling. "Then why the did you show me that stuff?" Vav let go of me and stood up. Her hands held out like she was trying to placate me, like I was a spooked horse. "I wanted to see how you'd react. You did well. So how much of that was true?" Vav laughed, shrugged. "I don't know, my husband drew those." I slumped down, feeling very heavy. "Vav, you're a piece of I wheezed. I hate you." She grinned. "Just wanted to make sure you weren't insane, Blue. I was just making sure." After that, every so often Vav would make jokes. Hey, Blue. If I asked you to kill our neighbours, would you do it? You. What if I said please? She would laugh wildly and waggle her fingers at me, going back to her crossword puzzles. One night I was making some spaghetti and there was a creak from outside. The geese hissed from near the kitchen door and hurried away. Hello? I called out. Jeff? I opened the door to see if there were spirits because I was so ready to blast my speakers at them. After the first couple of times, Vav told me about how the spirits, while craving other people, did not like loud noises. She says she thinks it's why there are less ghosts in highly populated areas. Vav came out of her bedroom, towel drying her hair. Something out there? She asked. I shrugged, moving back to the stove, stirring the sauce. It's real though, she said, and I jumped. She was leaning against the counter to the left of me. Those things we've been seeing, those are real, Blue. I shrugged. I know sometimes I don't make sense, but I think something went wrong up there. She gestured to her head. To help me deal with it. Your mum and me didn't have a good childhood out here, and neither did you. But those things, Jeff, the spirits, those are real. Some people like to mystify it, but they're just creatures. They can be hurt. Doesn't mean it isn't terrifying, I said. I used to be afraid a lot too, she said, smiling. Then I got angry, because they've ruined my life. Are you gonna let me see them? So I know I'm not mad? What about Marvin? She asked. Marvin doesn't count. Okay, she said. After dinner, we'll get in the truck and I'll show you. We drove for about an hour and a half. Vav took a turn off the highway onto a dirt road, and even with the high beams on, it was pretty dark. I sat there quietly, and Vav had turned off the radio, so I couldn't hum along. The windows were down so that we could hear, and it was nearing 11 when Vav turned at the big rock on the side of the road. The truck bounced a bit off-road, but it was nothing serious. I was pretty nervous and not really sure where we were going. Eventually we pulled up and Vav told me to get out. We walked for ages, until we came to a rocky climb. Vav hauled me up. We passed a stream and we walked for about 20 minutes more. It felt like I was on a journey to Mordor. Vav stopped when we came to a couple of large rocks that had a strip of blue material between them. Okay, she said. Here we are. I shone my torch around. There were just more rocks, but we were on an elevated spot, looking over an expanse of flat earth. Vav slung her backpack off her back and pulled out some stakes. She threw them out like discs and they landed about 10 meters away. They should come tonight, she said. It's the season for it. But be quiet. I went to speak, but Vav touched my arm, and her hand pressed over my lips. So no talking. We waited longer, as something snuffled along. Then there were more. Many more. Vav grabbed my arm and pulled me up so I was standing. Be prepared to run, if this is the wrong type, she said. There was a click as her torch lit the area. They were chittering. They looked a bit like caterpillars, but each was about as round and as long as a regular-sized fire hydrant. Their backs were crusted with soil, and their faces were strange, beaked, with huge pupils on either side of their heads. A couple of heads swiveled towards the light, and they shrieked, as though in pain. Vav started pulling me away. Let's go, she said. The stakes were gone, so those things had to be carnivorous, when one of them hissed at me like a snake. Its body began to quiver. It curled up like a spitting cobra, which, in hindsight, should have been enough of a warning. Their beaks clacked, and the chittering got louder. Its underbody revealed small sets of legs twitching with little spade-like claws, and the slit opened up from where the rest of the shaking belly rested on the ground. Vav swore and pulled me, but a shot of what I think was hit me on the collarbone and neck. The torch was off them then. Come on, Vav said. Did it get you? We began to pick our way quickly back to the car, but it was at least a 40-minute walk over loose rocks and changing inclines. Yes, I said, and my skin began to itch, heating up. Yes. If you ever had a migraine, you understand this pain. I could hardly talk. My legs kept slipping and I felt like something had picked me up, drilled some holes in my skull and then dropped me down a well. My eyes kept tearing up and at one point Vav was pouring water down the side of my head. I felt like the skin where the hit me was gone, that I had to be bled to feel this level of sensitivity, and I kept reaching up to feel it. "It'll be fine," she said, but her voice was too loud. "Come on, idiot, it's fine. There's hardly a mark." Let it be known that Vav is a piece of shit, second only to Jeff, the tall man. We got back to the car. All I could hear was static and that high-pitched noise you get stuck in your head, and I had no control over which way my head was lolling. I was bleeding from a couple of places, all places I'd fallen, tripped or slipped. Vav said later, I was lucky I was ragdolling about the place, because if I'd not, I might have broken something more. I became more aware of my headache, sometime while I was slumped against the window. My blood had left a nice imprint on the glass. We drove for a while and the next thing, I was whimpering and trying to escape from some really bright lights. Hiking, I heard Vav said, then clumsy, terrible, hadn't lost consciousness. I was able to refocus enough to realise that Vav, champion of the people, had bothered to bring me to a clinic. While not a full hospital, it would do for now. At first I thought Vav would take me home right away and try to treat me herself, but I think she knows that head injuries are something to be checked out. It turns out at one point that I'd been stumbling, I went down like a bag of and cracked my head on a rock, only I didn't hit any regular bit of my skull. Instead it was my eye socket. I had an orbital fracture. I had to take a ride in an ambulance to the hospital and have a CT scan to look for blood behind my eye and the severity of the break. As it turns out, I'm incredibly lucky when it comes to orbital fractures. I got a shower at the hospital with the assistance of a cool male nurse, and within 48 hours, I was home free. "The battered spouse clinic is not here, love," said Rooster, "but with a shiner like that, I can see why you're having trouble." F*** off. Back at work a couple of days later, I was rostered on to work night shift with Rooster. I didn't want Matt to have a look at my face, so I kept it to myself. Rooster was watching that episode of Ren and Stimpy where Ren is an insomniac, while I was happy to not be on a property where every caterpillar, grub and worm made me cringe. At about 11 PM, the icebox outside stopped working. I was behind the till and Rooster was restocking one of the fridges when it happened. The regular clank happened, followed by a high-pitched whine. Rooster came sliding up to the glass only a few seconds later and stared at the icebox. "Is it off?" he asked, staring at it. It was a Tuesday, so iced coffee, weird guy who always bought like 8 bags of ice, would probably be coming in soon, and he always complained if the icebox wasn't as cold. Dude, it's nice. Rule 1 of working the night shift here still hasn't changed. Do not leave the store. But I could see Rooster looking at the icebox. It would take like 2 seconds to just go out and check. Rooster is still considering it when this person out of nowhere is standing in front of the doors. Like, I didn't see them come up, neither did Rooster. He jumps, and this guy is standing there in a white singlet and a pair of jeans, no shoes. And he's doing the hand-holdy thing out, and I can still hardly see out of one of my eyes, and Rooster waves his hand around like a "Open the door," Rooster says, so I flick the switch and the doors open smoothly. This guy is all smiles and he says "G'day" to Rooster, and for a moment I wonder if but this guy has really hairy toes, so no. He disappeared into an aisle. Before the door could close, Rooster slipped through and went over to the icebox, leaving me alone with this guy. I was standing there like a limpet, and then I watched a packet of Samboy chips wobble on the shelf diagonally across from me, and then it launches itself off the shelf and lands on the ground behind the till. I was on ibuprofen codeine pills, so I was staring at this packet of chips and trying not to drool on myself, when weird guy clears his throat. I rang up his purchases, 2 strawberry gums, a Coke and a Kit Kat. Bottle of Coke exploded in the fridge that Rooster was just restocking. "Just this?" I ask. The weird guy nods. "Yes, just these, thank you." A packet of Fisherman's Mints starts to eject itself from the little mint stand next to me, and I'm getting this guy's change. I can hear another couple of boxes of tissues come off the top shelf, and Marvin is stomping angrily around the store. This guy looks at where it fell and says, "Stop." Quietly as anything. And the weirder part is, Marvin does. The guy raises his index finger and middle finger at me, pointing them like a little shooty gun. "Cheers," and cocked his thumb. This guy gave me the super creeps. He'd left really dirty footprints everywhere, and the second I flipped the door switch to let him out, Rooster came back in. The door closed, and Marvin cut the power for almost 3 minutes. And that is where Blue ends this story. I promise, third thread unfortunately never materializes. So as I said at the start, Australia is weird. But as always, draw your own conclusions. If you've had any similar experiences, especially in Australia or anywhere with long stretches of bushland, leave a comment below. And until next time, if the land goes quiet, don't stop to work out why.